sounds like the growl of a respirator. Here in the outback, we're here to research the rare crocodile species that call this place their home in the outback.
Crikey, we're looking out for these wily species in the outback, just trying not to get eaten. I got some raw pepperonis to use as bait.
Pepperonis? These rare crocodile species don't depend on pepperonis, they depend on the aerobics that they get in this wide open area.
Aerobics? Melina, I'm pretty sure that they depend on aerobic respiration.
Yeah, same thing. We're just here to show you the process of aerobic respiration.
Well, mate, it's important to know about the species we're trying to capture before we capture them. And one essential part of their bodily living functions of everyday life is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is a series of functions. The three main processes involved are glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Glucose enters the body through, food and stuff like that, and then it gets converted into the energy needed to run our bodies every day.
Glycolysis literally means the splitting of sugars. In glycolysis, it produces 2 ATPs, 2 pyruvic acids, and 2 NADHs. Glycolysis does not need oxygen. However, if it does acquire oxygen, then it turns into the process of cellular respiration.
Crikey! Watch out for that hawk! It's important that you know that glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. The 2 pyruvate molecules that are created from it go into the link reaction where acetyl coenzyme A are created.
The next step in aerobic respiration is the Krebs cycle, which is located in the matrix of the mitochondria.
The importance of this process cannot be overstated. It requires oxygen, but there's 2 ATP that are made from the process. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the most important thing in the bodies of me, you, and all the gators out there. ATP is the energy that lets our metabolic functions go and be forceful in the body. Now you gotta remember that ATP is different from ADP. ADP is how ATP is made. ADP and the phosphate are combined in ATP synthesis in chemiosmosis to produce the ATP, but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, amigo. Melina's gonna tell us more about the Krebs cycle.
There are 2 main problems with glycolysis, however, lack of ATP produced and a lack of NAD+ molecules. That wouldn't let me be able to climb up this tree here.
Look, Melina, we found a baby gator. This is the first step to finding the big crikey.
I think it's getting hungry. I speak baby gator.
Maybe not. As we watch the baby gator be released into its natural habitat, it's important to reflect on the way it breathes. The Krebs cycle is a necessary cycle that lets the NAD+ molecules act as electron carriers, receiving extra hydrogen atoms and electrons to form the NADH.
Now, we're going to tell you some steps of the Krebs cycle.
Step 1 of the Krebs cycle is the combination of the pyruvic acid and the coenzyme to create coenzyme A.
Step 2. Acetyl coenzyme A joins with the oxaloacetic acid to form a citric acid.
Step 3. When these 2 are combined, the citric acid is a 6th carbon. One of the carbons is oxidized to release a CO2 molecule, like this. Also, NADH is released as well. Now you gotta remember that each glucose molecule releases 2 pyruvic acids, so the Krebs cycle is going on twice. So all in all, 2 NADHs are produced in 2 CO2 molecules. When life gives you lemons, make sure you feed them to the gators.
Left behind is succinic acid, a 4-carbon molecule that lacks any of pyruvate's original carbons. This cycle produces ATP as well.
Oh, come on, Melina. There's no gators in here.
Crikey, you're right!
Here, hold some lemons. 2 hydrogen atoms and their corresponding electrons are released from the succinic acid. This causes the FAD to have FADH2. This remaining molecule is called malic acid.
The oxidation of succinic acid reproduces a hydrogen. That way it can produce an oxaloacetic acid and pick up another acetyl coenzyme A and a citric acid.
Oh, come on, Melina. We're not finding any gators this way. Do you think we're on VH1? Animal Planet doesn't pay us to sit around on the set.
This goes on to do the next process of anaerobic respiration.
Melina was right. We're going to take a little break from aerobic respiration and talk to you guys about anaerobic respiration. Because even though alligators don't normally do it, if they're really exerting themselves in the rivers, they might need to go through lactic acid fermentation. Wait! I think I see one! There's the pepperonis! I guess that was a false alarm. Ah, yes. Anaerobic respiration. It's simply respiration without oxygen.
Without oxygen?
Yes.
Anaerobic respiration is for the animals that live in environments unlike this one, such as the bottom of the ocean, the ones without oxygen. These organisms do not perform the final steps of cellular respiration, such as the Krebs cycle and chemiosmosis, but they still do glycolysis. The anaerobes perform glycolysis to make 2 ATPs per glucose, and then do fermentation. Fermentation is the reaction that converts pyruvates into another waste to give NAD+. There's 2 types, alcoholic and lactic acid. Mammals such as humans and reptiles such as crocodiles use lactic acid fermentation when they don't have enough oxygen. Continue on to the last process. It's important to know about the structure of the mitochondria. It's a large double membrane bound organelle found in all nearly eukaryotic cells. It plays a critical role in the conversion of energy through metabolism and is composed of an outer and inner membrane that divides the structure into 2 distinct regions, the inner membrane space and the matrix. The enzymes that help catalyze oxidative phosphorylation are embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. The events of the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation take place in the matrix. The membrane of the mitochondria is largely permeable and allows many molecules to freely diffuse across it. The inner membrane, on the other hand, is highly impermeable, only allowing water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen to freely cross it. This membrane contains specific proteins that can act as transporters of specific molecules such as ATP and pyruvate. Because only specific molecules are allowed to cross the inner mitochondrial membrane, an imbalance or gradient can develop between one side of the membrane versus the other. Molecules that cannot freely cross this inner membrane must be specifically transported in order to cross. We will see how the mitochondria uses gradients to produce ATP and oxidative phosphorylation.
Wait, what's that in the bushes?
I know!
Crikey! The energy for ATP synthesis is derived from the oxidation of NADH and FADH2 by the 4 protein complexes of the electron transport chain. The 10 NADH that enter the electron transport chain originate from each of the earlier processes of respiration. 2 from glycolysis, 2 from the transformation of pyruvate into acetyl coenzyme A, and 6 from the citric acid cycle. The 2 FADH2s originate in the citric acid cycle. You gotta remember that the citric acid cycle is also sometimes called the Krebs cycle. Events of the electron transport chain involve NADH and FADH, which act as electron transporters as they flow through the inner membrane space. In complex 1, electrons are passed from NADH to the electron transport chain, where they flow through the remaining complexes. NADH is oxidized to NAD in this process. Complex 2 oxidizes FADH, garnering some more electrons for the chain. At complex 3, no additional electrons enter the chain, but electrons from complexes 1 and 2 flow through it. When electrons arrive at complex 4, they are transferred to a molecule of oxygen. The oxygen gains electrons and is reduced to water.
Oh, looks like I'm on my own finding this rare crocodilian species. Oh wait, what's that in the distance? Oh, guess it was just a sea turtle.
Crikey, that was one riled up wolf. We get a lot of those out here in the Australian outback, but we really got to find that croc. You know what I think helps? Getting ready to prepare for tackling that brute. We got to work out.
Reduction reactions take place. Another connected event occurs in the electron transport chain. The movement of electrons through complexes 1 through 4 causes protons to be pumped out of the intermembrane space into the cell cytosol. As a result, the negative net charge builds up in the matrix space while a net positive charge builds up in the intermembrane space. This differential electrical charge establishes an electrochemical gradient. As we'll see in the next section, it is this gradient that drives ATP synthesis in oxidative phosphorylation.
Now we move our discussion past complexes 1 through 4 onto complex 5 called oxidative phosphorylation, in which ATP is synthesized from ADP and phosphate in the matrix of the mitochondria. The enzyme that catalyzes this reaction is called proton translocating ATP synthase, the protein component of complex 5.
Hit him like you mean it.
Introduced in the last section, as a result of the electron transport chain, an electrochemical gradient is formed on either side of the inner mitochondrial membrane. The outside of the membrane is positive while the inside is negative. The positive hydrogen ions are allowed to flow back across the membrane through specialized channels manned by proton translocating ATP synthase, which is use the energy created by the energetically favorable transport to synthesize ADP and phosphate into ATP.
Transport of just 2 electrons through the electron transport chain generates enough free energy to drive the synthesis of 1 molecule of ATP from ADP and the phosphate.
In process, the total glycolysis of 1 glucose molecule produces about 32 ATP.
Crikey, mate, do you think we're strong enough to battle the alligator now?
Do I look strong enough?
I would say so. Let's go. Crikey, we found the alligator! Hurry, Melina. What the pepperoni? I'm gonna go get it. Boy, mate, this one looks a little riled up.